Hello and welcome back to the Law, Liberty, Logic live stream. Glad to have you here. We're going to be doing another video today covering the Florida common pocket knife definition. But before we get to that, make sure that if you're seeing this and you haven't subscribed yet, please go ahead and click on down, hit that subscribe button, hit the notifications button. It means the world to me that you subscribe here. And the more that I see people subscribing, the more inspired I get to make these kind of videos covering different Florida legal issues. So it makes me happy. And of course, it enables me to produce more content. So I really appreciate that. Make sure you subscribe today, especially if this is the first time that you've come by here on the channel. Maybe it's getting pushed to you in the algorithm. So just make sure you get that notification for the future. All right. Without further ado, I'm going to be going into the Florida common pocket knife definitions. So this is specifically dealing with pocket knives and their kind of limitation that makes them different from other types of knives that might fall into a weapons category by default. So it's kind of a unique thing in Florida here, this pocket knife distinction. And so it has some implications as to when someone might be in trouble or not if they have this pocket knife versus a different type of knife that might be by default considered a weapon. So there's a lot of important things to take away from this lesson here today, and to think about, whenever you're carrying potentially a pocket knife, for utility purposes, or just for whatever comes up in life. And just a quick reminder here, I'm going to be using this little presentation that's got like a video format to it. The presentation is just for informational purposes only, of course. It's not intended as legal advice. If you have a specific situation, make sure you go and seek a licensed attorney if you need legal assistance, if you have a specific situation that you're in. But in the meantime, this is great information to start with to help flesh out your thoughts on what common pocket knives are and the limitations on those things. All right, let's take a look here at the next slide. So in the definitions here in the Florida statutes, that's where we are taking a look to see what this distinction is and what it means and where it comes from. So Florida does not consider a common pocket knife a weapon by default under Florida statutes. So under Florida statute 790.001, subsection 20 here, there's a definition section, and it says weapon means any dirk, knife, metallic knuckles, slingshot, billy, tear gas gun, chemical weapon or device, or other deadly weapon, except, keyword except, a firearm, which firearms are specifically described in the Florida statutes, or a common pocket knife. And you can see that highlighted here. And that's what we're focused on, is the common pocket knife. Plastic knife or blunt-bladed table knife. So again, just common pocket knife. We're not talking about your plastic cutlery at the barbecue, or your typical table knives that are used typically for cutting into butter or something like that. That might be a metal, butter knife or something like that. This is just common pocket knife that we're focused on in this, unique distinction. So understanding what makes a knife a common pocket knife is important to avoid certain charges, because obviously if you have a knife on you in certain special locations where you're not supposed to have any weapons, that could be a problem potentially, right? If you have something that's a weapon. So a common pocket knife won't fall into that in certain circumstances. So it's important to know that distinction to avoid getting yourself into any kind of trouble. All right, let's fast forward here to this key case. In 1997, the Florida Supreme Court in LBV State, so that's court citation 700, Southern Reporter 2D 370. This was a case that was, back a while ago, but, nonetheless, the core definitions that were presented there, still hold up in terms of influencing case law. So this dealt with a minor carrying a knife at school, and a lot of common pocket knife situations that you see in appellate courts, they do deal with, situations where it's a young person in school. It just kind of comes to the territory that some kids will bring a common pocket knife, folding knife to school, and for benign reasons, right? It's just, literally to, cut whatever, cut twine or open boxes or whatever else, cut an apple. There's totally a benign use for that. But a lot of times with the no tolerance policies in schools, the teachers will freak out and be like, oh my gosh, this kid, brought a weapon to school. And so, there was this situation that, arose back then, and a debate that took place for a long time about common pocket knives and schools, and the question of whether or not you know, basically a kid was bringing a weapon to school. So in this situation, the Florida Supreme Court noted that the Florida legislature did not define a common pocket knife. So unfortunately, the Florida legislature didn't say, hey, here are the specific attributes that make a common pocket knife. So it was a bit unclear. And, you know, normally you might think the Supreme Court would strike that down for being void for vagueness. I mean, it probably should have been, honestly, but they didn't. They said, well, you know, since there isn't a definition, we can basically come up with maybe an idea of what a common pocket knife is on our own. And, you know, in the process, they gave some ideas, but they didn't make a bright line rule. In other words, the Supreme Court, even with making some generalities about what common pocket knives are, they didn't sit there and say, here's what the exact measurements are and the exact, you know, aspects are and the limits. They weren't very exhaustive. So kind of a pain in the butt, but, you know, this is how sometimes lawyers are making their money because of these case law situations and these lack of clarity situations. They're not just clear in the statutes. You have to look at the cases. So the court here, you know, came up with these basic elements when they described what a common pocket knife would be. They said a blade of 4 inches in length or less, and they were citing to the Florida Attorney General's opinion on this, which took place in 1951. And so when they, you know, mentioned this, they just said, oh, you know, the Florida Attorney General, you know, he had, you know, idea about this, that it could be 4 inches in length. So we'll rely on that. And then they also looked at Webster's third new dictionary that was in 1986 for a definition. And it says in that dictionary, a blade folding into the handle to fit for being carried in the pocket. So the Supreme Court kind of came up with these basic ideas saying that, okay, the blade is 4 inches in length or less, and it folds into the handle. So, you know, while this is a, you know, this basic definition isn't really precise, again, they didn't strike it down. They just thought that, okay, this is reasonable and common enough to understand from, I guess, the dictionary and the Florida Attorney General, so they'll roll with it. So that's kind of what happened. Now, of course, that's not the end of the story, because after the Supreme Court did its thing, obviously different courts started to chime in with their thoughts about it. So lower courts have made some commentary on common pocket knives. You know, though none of their definitions have officially been taken up at the Florida Supreme Court. So, you know, these, you know, lower courts, right, they've said some things, but technically the Supreme Court hasn't taken up the cases and gone, okay, we're going to say yes or no to any individual lower appellate court's definitions, you know, or limitations. They didn't say yet what exactly is valid and what exactly is invalid. So we have, you know, the basic generalities, but depending on the lower circuit that you're in, you might have some different ideas about what are going to, you know, take that common pocket knife and put it into a weapon category versus what will not affect it and keep it, you know, basically as a common pocket knife. So CRV State in 2011, the 4th District noted that some courts pointed out weapon-like characteristics that could take a knife out of being a common pocket knife and make it a weapon. They said the 3rd District said that the notch combat style grip, so I guess, you know, kind of a notched firm grip thing with a large metal hilt guard. So basically like a metal protection part, you know, keep your hand from slipping on the knife and going onto the blade. That took it out of being a common pocket knife because it became more like a mini sword almost, you know, with the grip and that little protector, like kind of like a round plate or even just a metal guard thing. The 5th District said a push button double-sided switchblade is not going to be a common pocket knife. So if you have a button that, you know, see like a lot of those movies in the 70s when switchblades were common in movies to scare people, right? You'd flip the switchblade. That wouldn't be a common pocket knife. You know, so, you know, basically switchblade's got the double-sided, you know, sharpened points. It's got the button to release it, slides out kind of thing. So, you know, that makes it, you know, not going to be there, especially, you know, in the 5th District for sure. But again, these are different districts, and depending on where you're at, you know, they might say different things, or they'll have different cases. And eventually, you know, there's going to be something that caused it to go to the Supreme Court. But until then, we're kind of just dealing with the ad hoc. So there have also been some characteristics noted that do not take a common pocket knife and turn it into a weapon. So the 4th District in 2011 said that grooves on the handle and a partially serrated blade are not weapon-like characteristics on their own, with a blade under 4 inches that folds into the handle. So, you know, it's not going to, you know, take it out of being a common pocket knife just because the knife itself has some serration on it. and it's, the grooves on the handle, like in other words, having some grooves to make it so you can hold, kind of showing here. I'll even, point to something in my hand here, just kind of showing an example. All right, this has got a little groove in it. Boom. But that's not going to, on its own, at least according to the 4th district, that's not going to make it no longer a common pocket knife. So the 4th district also had another situation in 2011. Of course, that was a CRV state that we were just mentioned before, that a belt clip, blade opening knob, locking mechanism, and textured handle do not make a common pocket knife into a weapon by default. So, and I agree that that doesn't even make any sense, really. You know what I mean? If you have like a texture on the handle, right? This has a texture here. Why would that make it not a common pocket knife? Here it has, you can see it's got that, it's going to focus the belt clip here. That's normal for function. You're literally just holding the knife, on your belt, or make it easier to, hang in your pocket so you don't accidentally open it on yourself. I mean, that's just normal stuff for a common pocket knife. And so, at that point, you're just, up here measuring out what it is that you're going to have, right? So, this is the case where having 4 inches counts, right? So in other cases, 4 inches is not enough. But, as you can see here, this blade is clearly under 4 inches for sure. So, that's the kind of thing you're looking at, is usually, a blade that's going to be 4 inches or less. And a lot of common folding knives like this is here is going to be in the between 3 and 4 arena. This even has a protector in it, so you can, turn that off and then kind of, close it on itself. And I'll take 2 hands just to be safe. Doop. So, that's pretty much about it when it comes to the different district courts and the things that they've mentioned that, do or don't bring it out of that common pocket knife category. So, it depends on where you're at. There's different jurisdictions, depending on your location, they might have different interpretations, but there are some generalities to take away, at least from the case law that has been put out there so far. So generally speaking, the blades, the folding handle common pocket knives with blades at or below 4 inches, going to the handle kind of thing, that's typically your standard common pocket knife. Locking mechanisms, handle texture, partial serration, or belt clips are unlikely to turn a common pocket knife into a weapon on their own, right? So those things don't suddenly make it into a default legal weapon. Switchblade buttons, special handguard hilts, double-sided blades are likely to turn a common pocket knife into a statutory weapon by default. So again, this is just based on some of those other courts, making some rulings. You had, the 5th district and 3rd and 4th kind of opining there. It's not absolute. Maybe you're in the 1st or 2nd district. You never know what comes up there, but just looking at those cases, it just seems to be that there is that common pattern, that this is the likely direction that things would go. And it's possible that the Supreme Court would actually agree with those things potentially down the road, right? That they might reject having the handguard hilt as being something that you could still have and have a common pocket knife. I don't know what they will eventually say. It's been since 1997 since the Supreme Court has really looked at this in a distinct way, where they're really trying to get in on what a common pocket knife is. But that's kind of what you have to roll with. So by default, right, if you meet those basic ideas, your common pocket knife is not considered a weapon. So just because your common pocket knife is not considered a weapon by default doesn't mean it can't be considered a weapon if you use it as a weapon. So that's kind of important to take away there too, that just because by default it's not a weapon, right, doesn't mean that if you open this and then start stabbing somebody that it won't be considered having been turned into a weapon if you're using it to actually attack somebody. So that's all. It's just that, okay, if this is on you, that's not going to be by default considered, oh, you're carrying a weapon concealed, or you're carrying a weapon into some sensitive area just by a statutory default. There's other rules that can come into play, private property rules, and there's other statutes that might apply, especially for school situations and things like that in different events. But generally speaking, that is the takeaway of your common pocket knife. And if you follow those bare bones basics, you're probably going to be okay in all situations. But as always, you just got to check if there's something sensitive, if it's a sensitive area, there's special private event or this or that. You always want to just be extra careful. So I appreciate y'all coming on by and joining me for this little common pocket knives lesson. We can definitely talk more about different issues, especially issues that dovetail, in terms of, what happens if you have a common pocket knife, but then you modify it, or, other types of weapon situations. What happens, if you aren't following that and then you're carrying it on you and you're in a situation you're not supposed to be. We can definitely talk about those things later in future videos. But until then, make sure to like this video, subscribe, get the notifications, and I'll keep on producing more good content for you. Take care, everybody.